this is the inside of our longhouse. And as you can remember what the other longhouses look like, the reconstructions in Europe, I think we did a pretty decent job. For some of you, you may be interested in the post. Those were about 12, 14 feet high. I wanted to make the longhouse big and majestic, but we didn't have a lot of money to spend on making them like the really big construction. So I made them high with 8x8 timbers. We could have gotten away with smaller timbers. Some of you may wonder about the squareness of the joints. Well, they're 90 degrees. They're right on. What you're seeing is it seems like the angle is off a wee bit. It's an optical illusion, and it's a well-known optical illusion for architects. It happens with large buildings and pole barns. So anyway, that's the inside of our building. You can see the benches on the side and the hearth there in the center. What can we say about this? It's got a smoke hole and a couple of openings. It turns out that there is some thought that the longhouses had windows, and you'll find some longhouses that have openings. It turns out that the way you build this, when you put the roof on, there's a gap between the roof and the wall. It forms a natural opening, and you can either close that up or leave it open. Some people think that that opening may have been the origin of what we now call windows. And there's a number of references in the sagas to that. Basically, we really don't know, but it's possible that the openings in the longhouse were the start of windows as we know them. Benches. On the right, we're in Steng, Iceland, and Elspeth is sitting on the bench there. And on the left, Elspeth is sitting in our bench on New Year's Eve on 2012. It was very cold that night. It froze the mead on the bench. We tried to spend the night, but about 2 o'clock, we went back into the house.
we failed to adequately bank the fire, and it went out. Was about 15 below that night. The mead, which we left behind, froze solid.
I wasn't sure how to construct the benches, so I just did what seemed simple and reasonable. As you can see, it looks somewhat similar to what is at Steng. In Iceland, I talked to a Christiansen who was repairing Eric's house, and I asked about it. I was looking at the post, and all the tourists had left, and we were sitting around talking, and I said, how did you attach the benches? I noticed that there's a couple of marks here. It seems like you did it one way and then changed it. And he says, yeah, we really don't know how they did it. However you did it, it's probably just as good as anything. And so I was very pleased with that. He also told me that, they tell tourists, it was done authentically with authentic tools. And I asked him about that, and he says, well, when the tourists leave for the day, if you're behind, the power tools come out. Real nice guy, very knowledgeable. He had several longhouses back at his farm in Iceland. You want to do the cooking?
Yeah, so we sort of used our longhouse as an experiential archaeology laboratory to try some things. And with the cooking, first we found out that the fire is absolutely critical. Smoke is inevitable, as you can see in this picture, but not a serious problem if you've got good wood and if you keep your fire hot enough to assure that it keeps on drying through the hole that's quite far above it. We were able to make stews and porridge, which were what the Vikings mainly lived on because they always had to keep their fire going, or at least banked, because it was very hard for them to start a fire. Also, they wanted to cook their grain because they didn't want to have to grind it to make bread. But we also did make skillet flatbreads indoors. Outdoors, we had a clay oven and a cooking pit, and we made spit roasted meat over the this fire pit. You can see at the end here, there's half of what holds up the spit, and the other half is out of sight. This, by the way, is a fairly authentic cauldron. It's plates of iron riveted together. Does it leak? The first time, yes, but you make weak gruel and you don't scrub it out of the cracks, and the next time it doesn't leak.
For some of you, you may be wondering, how does the fire draw? Well, it turns out that we put a tunnel underneath the longhouse, and so it has intakes outside of the building, and the fresh air would come underneath the fire and come up. That's found in several of the archaeological digs. Usually the archaeologists say, oh, they must have run water down, but I think they may have, in some cases, used them for air intakes.
In the book that I took the pictures from, it's very clear that they used them for air intakes, going back into the Iron Age, pre-Viking period as well. I also want to talk about this one. This was one of the main experiments I wanted to do, was to set my work-weighted loom up in the longhouse. And, you know, this began back in 2007 when we took the classes at the same time. So there I am weaving in my longhouse with my work-weighted loom. The picture in the bottom is a picture of the work-weighted loom at Erikstadr in Iceland. The work-weighted loom allows you to weave something up to about 5-6 feet wide, and as long as you want, because when you get your cloth done, you just roll it up along the top beam and you let out more warp from the bottom. So you can weave something every bit as large as you can on a horizontal loom, but in much less space, which is important when you're in a long, narrow building. I also was able to prove that it is possible to weave by lamplight, although I did make more errors that way, and I do have to admit that the Viking women wove a lot better than I do. However, they started a lot younger as well.
Now, the bed chamber is extremely important. From a historical viewpoint, Elspeth and I are sitting in the bed in Erikstadr in Iceland. And if you look just to my left hand, there's a carved dragon. That's a bedpost. There's one right behind Elspeth. According to the sagas, those prized bedposts were very important because they were the cause of theft, murder, outlawry, and ultimately the settlement of Greenland. It's in the saga, and it's a fantastically interesting story. But we, of course, had to add one to our longhouse, and there on the right is Elspeth sitting on the bed that I made. Now, that bed is actually slides in and fits. The only problem is that because of the dimensions of the boards and the beams and the posts and whatnot, it's 5 foot 4 inches long. So Elspeth can sleep on it, and I can't. So she'd sleep on the bed, and I'd sleep on the sandstone floor.
But in the Viking Age, this bed would have been considered plenty large enough for 2 people, because they did sleep on pillows partially sitting up. This is mentioned several times in the sagas. Another thing I want to mention here, that we've got this plus 5 benches in our longhouse. That means that theoretically 12 people could sleep in our longhouse, and it's the smallest longhouse.
Yep, easily. Now, we had numerous groups come in to see the longhouse and spend some time. One group was from the University of Wisconsin in Green Bay. They have an experiential archaeology class taught by Professor Heidi Sherman. And they would stay for the weekend, and we would do crafts and stuff and try to introduce what life was like in the Viking Hall. And they did some blacksmithing and whatnot. But of course, we had about 20 students, and of course they're all staying overnight. So we have to provide some sort of bathroom facilities. And first year they just run up to the house and use that. But you know, I started to worry a little bit about them stumbling around in the dark and you know, running into the bathroom. So I said we better build an outhouse. And we know that the longhouses had outhouses that were separate from the longhouse. It's in the sagas, and there's a fantastic Halloween story about one case where it describes using the outhouse. But anyway, this is our outhouse. It is, again, a Grin building, and we tried wattle and daub, but the climate was such that it would get too moist at the bottom, and every year we'd have to fix it, and I'd keep changing it and whatnot. When we left, we took the outhouse with us, and that right now is underneath our porch here. The actual privy is a camping bucket, but I built a box around it that tends to be somewhat authentic. The base is like a chair that we know of, and the top is built just the way an outhouse top was built in Jorvik. Well, life goes on, and when Elspeth retired, we didn't have any commitments, and our daughter said, "Come and live with us here in Virginia and be with the grandchildren." So we decided to move to Virginia. Of course, what do we do with our longhouse? I mean, you know, it's something that you think about all your life. We're married 30 some years before we built it, 35, and then you build it, and what do you do with it? Well, we decided to donate it to UW Green Bay. So the picture in the upper right is where it stood on our property in Wisconsin. The picture in the lower right is where it's standing now at the UW Green Bay campus. To my knowledge, and I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, I think UW Green Bay is the only educational institution that has its own authentic longhouse, and I'm pretty proud of that fact.
And this picture was taken at a time when they had an culinary archaeologist teaching a course in Viking cooking at the reconstructed longhouse. You'll also notice the color is different. It's been now painted with red pine tar based paint.
Looks fantastic. Yeah, if you're wondering, I had to take it apart piece by piece by piece, package it up, ship it to UW Green Bay, and then I couldn't put it together because of the legal ramifications. They had to have contractors come in. So I was there, and we had some contractors put it up. We assembled that whole building in 1 week. These guys were fantastic. And then the roofers came in and installed the slate.
At the University of Wisconsin Green Bay, they're using it for much more than we could ever have done. Not only the Viking-age cooking course that I mentioned, but blacksmithing courses. They have a professor who teaches Old Norse in the Longhouse. They have been giving tours for middle school students and for high school students who may be interested in attending UW Green Bay. They also allow other groups to use it. Sons of Norway, historical societies, and the Society for Creative Anachronism have all been able to hold meetings there.
So let me see. I can stop sharing, and then we can take some questions.